My son Daniel locked my husband and me inside the old tool shed behind our house, yelling, "You two are finished here." Standing in the darkness, I felt my husband touch my arm and whisper, "Stay calm. There's something they haven't found yet." After Daniel walked away, my husband reached up to a hidden shelf and revealed a secret box he had protected for 35 years. Hello, my wonderful friends. Thank you for being here with me today. Before we start, I would love it if you could subscribe to Jamal's Stories and leave a comment telling me which city or country you are watching from. It makes me so happy to know our stories reach people everywhere. I hope you enjoy what you hear today. This farm has its own heartbeat. I can feel it pumping through the soil like blood through veins. When morning comes and the Colorado sun peeks over the mountains, the barn doors creak open and the horses stomp their feet, ready for a new day. When evening falls, everything grows quiet and still, and the wind through the wheat fields sounds like a lullaby. I have been living here for 38 years. This land has become part of who I am. My wife's grandfather, Thomas, a man with strong hands and a bigger heart, started this farm from nothing. He didn't build it to sell someday. He built it so his children and their children would always have a home, a place full of happy memories. This morning I was cooking oatmeal like I always do. Simple warm oatmeal with honey and cinnamon, the way my mother showed me. My wife Sarah barely eats anything these days, but the smell of warm oatmeal sometimes makes her smile a little. I was stirring the pot slowly, thinking about when Daniel was little. He used to stand on a chair next to me, holding a wooden spoon like it was a magic wand. "Daddy, I'm making breakfast for the whole world," he would say, and we would laugh together. That laughter still feels alive in the wood grain of our kitchen counter. "That boring stuff again, Mr. Marcus." The voice of Nicole, Daniel's wife, broke into my thoughts like cold water splashing on my face. "We discussed this already. The internet has thousands of recipes. Smoothie bowls, avocado toast. Can't you learn something different? Daniel needs better food than this." She stood in the doorway wearing a fancy white bathrobe, her arms folded tight across her chest. She never called me Dad, only Mr. Marcus, and her voice always felt like ice. I didn't look up from the stove. I just kept stirring slowly. "Your husband has always loved this oatmeal," I said quietly. "And his mother loves it too." "Mother doesn't know what's good anymore," she snapped back. "But Daniel deserves more than this." They have been living with us for almost 3 years now, ever since Sarah got very sick and couldn't work on the farm anymore. First, it seemed like the right thing to do. Families should help each other when times are hard. I gave them the big bedroom upstairs with windows looking out over the fields. Sarah and I moved into the small guest room downstairs so she wouldn't have to climb steps anymore. Little by little, their things, their habits, their smells, Nicole's sweet perfume, Daniel's strong cologne, started to take over our home. Last week, she threw away Grandpa Thomas's old rocking chair without asking me. That chair sat by the fireplace for 50 years. She called it ugly and replaced it with some weird metal thing that looked like it belonged in a museum. "It doesn't match our style," she said to me with a shrug. I didn't argue with her. I just went outside late that night and sat on the porch steps, remembering how Daniel used to fall asleep in that chair while his great-grandpa told him stories. I remembered sitting in it myself when Daniel was a baby, rocking him to sleep and dreaming about teaching him how to run the farm someday. But he grew up. And then came his big job in the city that took all his time, and my dreams slowly faded away like morning fog. Sarah lay in bed staring at nothing. Her body had grown weak, but her mind was still sharp sometimes, like a knife cutting through butter. I walked over and sat beside her, holding her hand. Her skin felt paper-thin and dry. "How are you feeling, my love?" I whispered. She turned her head slowly. Her eyes found mine. "They're too loud," she breathed out. Yes, they were always loud. Their voices, their fights about money, their laughing that sounded mean instead of happy. All of it felt wrong in our peaceful home. Daniel came down for breakfast. He didn't say good morning. He just sat at the table and stared at his phone. I put a bowl of oatmeal in front of him. He pushed it to the side. Dad, we need to. This is serious. Nicole appeared beside him instantly, sitting across from him and folding her hands on the table. Her eyes had that hungry look I had learned to recognize. It meant trouble was coming. We've been thinking with all the paperwork and legal stuff, Daniel started, still looking at his phone screen. Mom is too sick to handle things. To make everything easier later, you should sign the farm over to me now. It's just paperwork to avoid problems. My stomach felt like it dropped to the floor. Not from his words, but from how easy. He said them like he was asking me to pass the butter. No, I said. My voice didn't shake. This farm belongs to your mother and me. While we're alive, nothing changes. So you don't want to help your own son. Nicole leaned forward. You want Daniel running around government buildings later when, well, you know what happens. I know exactly what you mean, I replied, looking straight into her eyes. And that's why the answer is no. Daniel finally looked up from his phone. There was no love in his face, only cold anger like I was a stranger blocking his path. I don't see the problem. We live here. We help take care of Mom. You live in my house, I corrected him. Take care of Mom. Right then, Sarah appeared in the doorway. She was leaning against the frame, breathing hard. She must have heard everything. Her eyes looked surprisingly clear. She wasn't looking at me. She was staring at Daniel. Her voice was soft but every word hit hard. You bring shame to this family. Shame. That word struck Daniel like lightning. I saw his face twist up. It wasn't just anger. It was the rage of someone whose pride got hurt, someone who thought this farm should already be his. His whole life was built on being the farm owner's son. What? He shouted, jumping up so fast his chair fell over with a loud bang. Shame. Have you lost your mind? I'm the only son. This farm is mine by right. It should have been mine years ago. He walked toward his mother. I jumped between them. Daniel, stop this right now. No. I'm done. His eyes looked wild and scary. This place is ours now. He grabbed my shoulder, not hard enough to hurt but hard enough to move me, and pushed me aside. Then he grabbed his mother's arm. Sarah was too weak to fight back. Daniel dragged us through the kitchen toward the back door that led to the old tool shed. Daniel, what are you doing? I yelled, trying to pull away. You need to learn your lesson, he growled. He threw open the shed door and the smell of dirt and old wood filled my nose. He shoved us inside roughly, onto the dusty floor. I caught Sarah before she could fall. The door slammed shut and we heard the lock click from outside. We were trapped in complete darkness. The only sound was our breathing, mine fast and scared, Sarah's slow and raspy. I sat on the cold floor, holding Sarah close to me. The tears wouldn't come. Inside, everything felt frozen and numb. All those years of love and hard work. My whole life spent raising this boy, caring for this farm, loving this family. And it all ended here in this dark, dusty shed. I felt completely broken into a million pieces. And in this heavy silence, in this black hole of sadness, I heard my husband's quiet voice. She pressed her lips close to my ear, speaking so softly I almost couldn't hear. They come. There's something they haven't found yet. My wife's words cut through the darkness, and I froze, listening carefully. Above us, Daniel's heavy boots stomped across the porch, followed by Nicole's lighter footsteps tapping quickly. The truck door slammed, so hard the shed walls shook. A second later, the engine roared to life, got louder, then faded away. They were gone. We were alone in the cold, empty silence of our own farm, locked inside a shed like animals. Help me up, Sarah whispered. Her voice was weak, but something strong and determined was hiding in it. I helped her stand. Her body shook from weakness and cold. Slowly, carefully, we stood up on the dirt floor. It smelled like old paint cans and rusty tools and forgotten things. The only light came from a tiny crack under the door. In the dim shadows, I could barely see the shapes of shelves covered in spider webs and boxes piled in the corners. Sarah didn't go to the shelves. She walked to the back wall, to the wooden boards that made up the shed's backside. She leaned against the rough wood, breathing hard. "Here," she whispered. "My grandfather showed me when I was 16. He said it was for an emergency only. I thought we would never need it." She ran her hand along the wall, feeling for something in the darkness. Finally she stopped. "Here. Whoosh. I'm too weak." I touched the wood where she pointed. One of the old boards looked just like all the others. But when I pushed harder, it moved inward with a quiet scraping sound. Behind it, a black empty space opened up. Inside this hiding spot, something dark was tucked away. I reached my hand in carefully and felt cold, smooth metal. It was a small metal box, an old cookie tin from many years ago. Pulled it out. Felt light, almost empty. We shuffled back to sit near the door where a little light came through. Sarah took the box from me. Her fingers struggled with the lid for a long time. Finally, with a soft click, it opened. I thought we might find anything inside. Old photos, maybe some emergency money hidden by Grandpa Thomas. But inside there was nothing shiny or valuable looking. Only some old yellow papers folded up small. Sarah took out the first paper and unfolded it. Even in the bad light, I saw an official stamp and faded purple ink. It was a legal document. "Read this," Sarah said softly. I took the paper carefully. It felt delicate as a dry leaf. The name written in fancy handwriting was one I didn't know. Benjamin Cole. Place of birth, a charity hospital in Kansas. A place I had only heard sad stories about. Mother's name crossed out. Father's name, William Cole. "I don't understand," I whispered, looking at my wife. "That's me," she said quietly. "That is my real name." Something broke inside my chest. For 38 years, I had lived with Sarah Thompson, granddaughter of the respected farmer Thomas Thompson, heir to a well-known family. And now this thin piece of paper was telling me I didn't really know the woman I had loved my whole life, the woman I raised a son with, built a life with. She took out the next paper. It was an adoption form. Benjamin Cole, adopted by Thomas and Martha Thompson. The new daughter is given the last name Thompson and the name Sarah. Everything was marked with official stamps. The last thing in the box wasn't official. It was a letter written in Grandpa Thomas's familiar handwriting. Sarah handed it to me. "Granddaughter," I read silently, trying to make out the words in the darkness. "If you're reading this, hard times have come and I'm probably gone. I never told you everything because I was scared it would hurt you. Your father, William Cole, was a good and honest teacher, a brave man who stood up for what was right. But in our town, being brave sometimes gets you punished. He was accused of terrible things he didn't do, called a troublemaker, and he died in an accident that I don't believe was really an accident. I was his friend. I promised him I would save his daughter. I adopted you and gave you my name, my family, to protect you, to erase the stain they tried to put on your father's name. Live with pride, Sarah. Carry the Thompson name with honor, but never forget whose blood runs in your veins. The blood of a brave man." I finished reading and folded the letter slowly. The cold that started in the shed was now inside me, freezing my bones. All these years, Sarah lived with this secret. She was afraid of the past catching up. She protected a name that wasn't hers by birth. And Daniel, our son, he built his whole life, all his pride, on this name. He bragged about his great-grandfather the farmer, his family history, his heritage. A heritage that didn't exist by blood. All the pain, all the mean treatment of the last few years, all the insults I swallowed like bitter medicine. All of it suddenly pressed down on one spot in my chest. But it didn't explode into screaming or crying. It froze solid, turning into a hard, perfectly clear piece of ice. And looking through its cold surface, I saw everything with perfect clarity. I used to work as a town clerk. I worked with documents, with facts, with histories people wanted to hide or change. I knew how powerful truth locked in old papers could be. And what I held now wasn't just a family secret. It was a weapon. It was power. Real, undeniable power. We sat in the dark for maybe 2 or 3 hours. Time seemed to stop. Sarah dozed off, resting her head on my shoulder, too tired to stay awake. I sat perfectly still, staring into nothing, and my brain, for the first time in years, worked like a well-oiled machine. A plan built itself in my mind, logical and cold as winter. Finally we heard noise outside. The lock scraped open with a sharp sound. The door flew open and bright sunlight blinded my eyes. Daniel stood in the doorway. His face looked smug and satisfied. "Well, did you think about it?" he asked with a mean smile. "Mom, are you okay? Should I call a doctor?" He was pretending to be nice. It was part of his game. "Yes," I said, standing up. My voice sounded steady and calm, which surprised even me. "She needs help. Give me your phone. I'll make a call." He looked confused for a second because I gave in so easily, but then he smirked and handed me his cell phone. "Here. One call to get a doctor, and don't try anything funny." Took the phone. It felt warm in my cold hands. I didn't look through his contacts. I knew the number by heart. A few years ago, I read a newspaper article about a lawyer who helped families with complicated property problems. He was described as smart and tough. I remembered his name just in case. Turns out that was a good decision. I calmly typed in the number. Daniel looked down at me, expecting to hear me call some medical service. A sharp male voice answered. "Raymond Foster speaking." "Mr. Foster, good afternoon," I said clearly and calmly. "My name is Marcus Bennett. I need your help urgently." I arranged a meeting with Raymond Foster, and without changing my face, I handed the phone back to my son. He took it lazily and looked at the screen to see who I called. The number didn't have a name attached. He probably thought it was a doctor's office, and complete satisfaction showed on his face. He had won. The old father was broken and gave up. "Good man," he said, more to himself than to me. "Smart choice. Come on, Nicole. Let's help Mom inside. Can't have her sitting on the ground." They helped Sarah into the house with fake concern that hurt to watch. They acted like generous winners, and I was their audience. They put her in bed, fixed her blanket, brought water. They were putting on a show of being kind, and they thought I believed it. I watched silently, and they thought my silence meant I surrendered. That was their first big mistake. In the days that followed, a strange, unnatural quietness filled the house. I did my chores like a robot. I made soup for Sarah, cleaned rooms, washed clothes. I moved through the house like a ghost, a shadow, and this made them happy. They stopped noticing me the way you stop noticing old furniture. I became part of the background, useful and silent. And this gave me something I didn't have before: a chance to listen and watch. They stopped hiding. They decided they could say anything in front of me. After all, a broken person can't fight back. One morning at breakfast, while I was quietly serving toast, Nicole, flipping through a fancy magazine, said to Daniel, "Sweetie, I've been thinking. That wall between the living room and the guest bedroom. It's not important. If we knock it down, we'll have a huge open space. We can put a white kitchen island right there." Froze for a second with the pan in my hand. The wall she wanted to destroy. Grandpa Thomas's bookshelf stood against that wall, where he kept his farming journals. Against that wall, Sarah taught little Daniel his alphabet. There on the wallpaper, if you looked close, you could still see a pencil mark showing Daniel's height at age 4. She talked about it like it was just garbage in the way of her kitchen island. "Great idea," Daniel answered, not looking up from his coffee. "The bedroom will be empty soon. Anyway, and all those old farm books. Well, we can sell them or throw them away. Who reads that stuff now? Throw away books." Grandpa Thomas collected his whole life. Old farming guides, rare books about Colorado history, leather books with gold letters, books signed by famous farmers from long ago. Thrown away. I set the plate of toast on the table. My hands moved smoothly. Not a single muscle in my face moved, but inside me something cracked and fell away. The last tiny piece of hope that there was still something left in my son, of the boy who loved listening to his great-grandpa read to him. They saw my calmness and thought it was giving up. that I was too old and tired to care. They didn't understand that this was the calmness of a doctor studying an X-ray with cold attention before doing surgery. Every word, every action was a clue showing me their sickness. The sickness called greed and selfishness. The worst moment came on Thursday afternoon. They came to me while I sat by Sarah's bed, reading old poems to her out loud. They walked in with serious, concerned faces like people visiting someone in the hospital. "Dad," Daniel began in a tone full of fake sympathy. "Nicole and I talked about everything. We understand how hard this is for you. All the worry, the farm, Mom. You've given your whole life to us. You deserve to rest." Nicole quickly added, putting her painted fingernails on my shoulder. The touch was light, but I felt coldness seep under my skin. "We found a wonderful place for you, Mr. Marcus. An assisted living community, not some horrible nursing home. No, this is a nice facility just outside Denver. Mountain View Gardens. Beautiful grounds, 3 meals a day, nurses available all the time. You'll have your own comfortable room. You can go for walks, read books, meet people your own age. We'll come visit you every month." They looked at me expecting thanks. They truly believed they were doing something nice for me. They were offering me, the owner of this farm, a comfortable room in exchange for my past, my life, everything I cared about. They wanted to rip me away from the land I had grown roots in and plant me in a government pot so I would quietly die there, not getting in their way anymore. I raised my eyes to look at them. I looked at Daniel, at his face that looked so much like mine, but felt so foreign and strange. I searched his face for something, a tiny bit of doubt, a spark of guilt, but found nothing. There was only confidence that he was doing the right thing and slight annoyance that he had to waste time explaining it to me. At that exact moment the last drop of my fatherly love died. It didn't disappear in anger or drown in tears. It simply stopped existing like a light bulb burning out, and the glow that had lasted 38 years went dark forever. I looked at this man and saw not a son but a stranger. A calculating, cruel stranger who happened to have my eyes. And this realization didn't bring pain but a strange, cold freedom. I owed him nothing anymore. Not love, not forgiveness, not mercy. "That sounds very thoughtful," I said quietly. My voice sounded empty but steady. "I need some time to think about it." Of course. "Take your time," Daniel said happily. Clearly pleased the conversation went without crying or fighting. "We just want what's best for you." They left, trailing clouds of expensive cologne and total confidence in their victory. I stayed sitting in the silence, broken only by Sarah's breathing as she slept. I looked at our photos on the dresser. Here we were young on our wedding day. Here we were with baby Daniel at the county fair. A whole life captured in these frames. A life built on love, sacrifice, and it turned out on a lie. But even that lie was nobler than the ugly truth my son and his wife showed me today. I no longer felt like a victim. The feeling of being hurt evaporated, leaving behind emptiness and a cold, ringing determination. They erased everything that connected me to them. They freed me from the chains of being a father. They underestimated me. They saw a weak old man in front of them. They didn't know that quiet town clerks store documents that can change everything, and that a quiet man who worked with those documents his whole life knows how to use them. Tomorrow I meet with Raymond Foster, and I will go there not begging for help but with a battle plan ready. The next day, I told Daniel I needed to go to town to the feed store for special grain for the horses that our local store didn't carry. He gave me money for a taxi like he was doing me a huge favor. Nicole even helped me put on my jacket and straighten my collar like I was a child. "Don't take too long, Mr. Marcus. Dinner needs to be cooked." I nodded and left the house, feeling their condescending stares on my back. They were watching an obedient old man going out to run errands. They didn't know I was going to war. Raymond Foster's office was in a modern building in downtown Denver with tall ceilings and quiet hallways. He turned out to be a man around 45 with a sharp, piercing stare and no wasted movements. He didn't gasp or offer pity. He listened. I spoke calmly without emotion, laying out facts. The mistreatment, the demands, the pressure to sign over the farm, the shed. When I finished, he was quiet for a few seconds, looking at me carefully. "Do you have documents proving your rights to the farm?" he asked finally. His voice was calm, but I could hear steel underneath. "I have something more important," I answered and took the metal tin from my bag. I laid its contents on the shiny desk. The birth certificate with the name Benjamin Cole, the adoption papers, Grandpa Thomas's letter. Raymond put on his glasses and started studying the papers. He read slowly, carefully, like he was absorbing every single word. I saw his expression change. Professional interest turned to surprise, and then to the focus of a chess player who just got handed a winning move. He looked up at me. There was no longer simple concern in his eyes. There was excitement. "Mr. Bennett, this changes everything. Absolutely everything. The Thompson name isn't just a last name. In farming communities, it's like gold. Your son built his reputation, his connections, his entire social standing on this name. If it comes out that he has no blood right to it..." "I understand completely," I interrupted him. "I want my farm and my peace back." "You'll get much more than that," he said, and I heard notes in his voice that woke something up inside me. "You'll get justice. But I need time. I need to verify some things. The name William Cole sounds familiar. Let me work on this." I went home, leaving the documents with him, and sank back into the gray, quiet routine. Daniel and Nicole, seeing I didn't bring up the retirement home again, decided I had given up and was just waiting for my fate. They already acted like full owners. Nicole ordered furniture catalogs. In the evenings, they sat in the living room loudly discussing which shade of beige would look best on the walls of their future open-plan kitchen. I walked past without stopping, but every word they said was stored in my memory, becoming another brick in the wall of my determination. A week passed. A week of slow, tense waiting. And then Raymond Foster called me. On the old house phone when Daniel and Nicole were out shopping. "Mr. Bennett, can you talk?" His voice was tight with barely controlled excitement. "Yes, I'm alone. I have news and it's incredible." I dug through archives, unofficial ones of course. I had to use connections from my law school professor. What I found explains why Thomas Thompson was so scared of his adopted daughter's past. He paused, and I heard him take a breath. William Cole wasn't just someone who got in trouble for speaking his mind. That's too simple. He was one of the most respected teachers in his county, a man who fought for children's rights in schools. In the early 70s, he was working on a program to help poor families get education, but he had strong beliefs. He refused to stay quiet when the school board wanted to cut funding for disabled kids. They tried to silence him, then threaten him. He wouldn't back down. So they destroyed him. They made up lies. He wasn't just accused of causing trouble. He was accused of stealing school money, of taking bribes from parents. I listened, and the cold that had settled in me in the shed seemed to turn my blood to ice. There was a quick trial, Raymond continued. His name was removed from everything. From teaching awards, from school records, from photos on the wall. It's like he never existed. But in education circles and among school administrators, his name is still remembered. Not as the name of a hero, but as the name of a thief, a stain that in those circles doesn't wash away even after 2 generations. I was silent, struggling to breathe. I sat down hard on a chair. "Do you understand what this means, Mr. Bennett?" Raymond's voice became quieter but sharper. "Your son Daniel builds his business on reputation. He's proud of his family name. His business partners, his customers, these are people for whom reputation, clean family history, and generations of respect mean everything. They do business with the great-grandson of the respected farmer Thomas Thompson. Now imagine what happens to his business, to his position in society, when it comes out that he's actually the great-grandson of William Cole, a man whose name for them means thief and liar." There it was. That was the weapon I had imagined. But it turned out to be not just a gun. It was a bomb. A bomb that could not only get my farm back but destroy the entire world my son had so carefully built for himself. This won't just take away his inheritance, Raymond finished. This will destroy him socially, professionally, financially. He'll become an outsider, unwanted. For him and his wife, that's worse than dying. Hung up the phone. I sat in the kitchen in silence. The sun shined through the window. A cactus plant bloomed in a pot on the windowsill. Everything looked the same as always, but the world had changed completely. The stakes in this fight had risen to the sky. It was no longer about an old farm and a hurt father. It was about the complete destruction of my son's life. And I felt no horror, no pity, no fatherly instinct that should have been screaming inside me to protect my child, no matter what he did. Whoa. I felt only cold, eerie satisfaction. A feeling of perfect, calculated justice. You wanted to take my farm. You wanted to throw me into a home. You wanted to erase my life like an unwanted mark in a book. Fine. Let's see what it feels like when your life gets erased. When your whole existence built on pride and lies turns to dust from one breath of truth. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked at the fields I had worked with my own hands, at the old barn where little Daniel used to play hide and seek. I was saying goodbye to him. Not to the man who lived upstairs now, but to that little boy I once loved more than my own life. Saying goodbye forever because I knew I would pull the trigger without hesitation. I stepped back from the window when I heard a truck pulling up. They were back. My heart didn't race. It beat steadily, coldly, counting down the seconds until the beginning of the end. I walked into the hallway to meet them, not as a servant, but as the owner of the farm. For the first time in months I stood up straight. They walked in laughing, carrying bags from expensive stores. Nicole held a bunch of paint samples. They were in a wonderful mood. "Mr. Marcus, you're here," Nicole said without looking at me. "Daniel, look. This cream color will look perfect in the new kitchen." They didn't even notice how I had changed. They were too absorbed in themselves, in their future, which they had already planned inside the walls of my farm. 2 days later, on Saturday morning, the doorbell rang. Daniel went to answer it, grumbling about unexpected visitors. I waited in the living room. I knew who it was. Raymond Foster stood at the door. He was dressed in a sharp dark suit. In his hands was a thin leather folder. Behind him stood a serious-looking woman, a legal assistant from his firm. "Daniel Bennett?" Raymond asked in a flat, businesslike voice. "Yes, and who are you?" Daniel looked him up and down. "My name is Raymond Foster. I represent the owner of this property, Marcus Bennett. This is for you." He handed Daniel a thick envelope. Daniel took it, looking confused. He glanced at me, then back at Raymond. His face showed total confusion. "Owner? What owner? This is my family's farm." "I would ask you to read the document," Raymond replied coldly. Nicole came out of the kitchen, hearing voices. Seeing the strange man, she frowned. Daniel ripped open the envelope angrily. He started reading, and I watched the color slowly drain from his face. First confusion turned to anger, and then he laughed. Loud, crazy laughter. "Eviction." He laughed hard. "Dad, is this your joke? You hired this guy to scare us? This is ridiculous." Nicole grabbed the paper from him and scanned it quickly. Her face also twisted into a mean sneer. "Mr. Marcus, we thought you had given up, but you decided to play games. Very cute, but we don't have time for this." She turned to Raymond. "Sir, I'm afraid my father-in-law has confused you. He's an elderly person, a bit confused." She walked confidently to a drawer, took out a folder, and pulled a document from it. "Here is the real document. The farm deed. The property belongs to my husband, Daniel Bennett. So you can take your papers and leave." She handed the paper to Raymond. Raymond took it without even looking at me. He held the paper up to the light and studied it carefully. I watched his calm, focused face. "Interesting document," he said finally, handing it back to Nicole. "Especially interesting is Mr. Bennett's signature. Oh, fresh. And the notary stamp." I know this notary, Mrs. Patterson. It's unfortunate that she retired and moved to Florida 3 years ago. It must be quite a document if she had to notarize it from another state without her official seal. A ringing silence filled the room. The laughter died on Daniel's lips. Nicole stared at Raymond. Her face went white as paper. What are you saying? She stammered. I'm saying this paper is a clumsy, very clumsy fake. Raymond continued calmly, looking straight into Nicole's eyes. Handwriting analysis will prove this in one day. And then we'll be talking not about eviction but about fraud and forgery. That's a felony. Several years in prison. Daniel stepped forward. His face turned red with rage. Who are you to threaten us in our own house? I'm a lawyer and I don't threaten. I inform you of consequences. The farm, as I said, belongs to my client. This is confirmed by the will of his late father-in-law, Thomas Thompson. The original which I have. It clearly states that the sole heir to all his property is his grandson-in-law, Marcus Bennett, in gratitude for his care of the family. Your wife Sarah was aware of this and never challenged her grandfather's will. He said the word wife with a barely noticeable pause. Was the first warning shot. Daniel and Nicole looked at each other. In their eyes for the first time I saw not anger, not contempt, but fear. Real, animal fear of a trapped creature. They realized this wasn't an old man losing his mind. This wasn't an emotional reaction. This was a carefully planned attack. We'll fight this, Daniel shouted. We'll prove he's not capable of making decisions, that you tricked him. I'm the only Bennett, the direct heir. I have a right to this farm. Raymond nodded slowly, like he expected exactly those words. He took a step forward. His voice became quieter, almost friendly, but all the more frightening because of it. You can certainly try court proceedings to challenge the will. But understand, Mr. Bennett, to challenge Thomas Thompson's will, you'll first have to prove to the court that you have a legal right to do so. That you, as you say, are a direct heir. And for that, he paused again, letting every word sink into the air. It will require a full and public investigation of the Thompson family history, with all necessary background checks and digging up of archived documents to establish, so to speak, the authenticity of the family line. He went silent, and in that silence I heard my own heart beating loudly in my ears. He didn't say anything directly. He didn't mention the name Cole. He didn't talk about the false accusations against William. He just threw that phrase on the table. Full and public investigation of family history. And that phrase exploded in the room like a silent bomb. Nicole swayed and grabbed the edge of the table. Her face showed horror and total confusion. But Daniel understood everything. He didn't know the details. He didn't know the whole truth. But he heard in Raymond's words a threat aimed at the very heart of his world, at the foundation of who he thought he was. He went so pale his lips turned blue. They looked at me, at the quiet, gray-haired man who had been standing silently by the door all this time. And in their eyes, I finally saw what I had been waiting for. Not just fear but understanding. Understanding that the old man they had written off, the man they locked in the shed, the man they were going to ship off to die in a home, held the strings of their lives in his hands. And he was ready to cut them. Raymond Foster nodded to me, turned around and walked out. The assistant followed him. The door closed with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot in the thick silence. We were left alone, the three of us. Me, my son, and his wife. The air in the room became heavy and hard to breathe. Daniel recovered first. His shock was replaced by rage. Dark animal rage that swept away everything. What was that? He screamed, spinning toward me. His face twisted, became ugly and violent. What have you done? You're trying to destroy your own family. You teamed up with that lawyer to throw us into the street. He moved toward me, and for a second I saw in his eyes the same craziness as the day he pushed us into the shed. But I felt no fear. I stood still, looking him in the eyes. You don't understand what you've gotten yourself into, Nicole joined in. Her voice cracked into a high squeal. She paced the room like a caged bird. Family history. What history? What did he mean? Are you hiding something? Some shameful secrets. They screamed, accused, threatened. They said they would have me declared mentally unfit, prove I was crazy, that I would ruin the Thompson name forever. They threw words like rocks, trying to break through my silence, trying to make me afraid, to make me back down. But their rocks bounced off my calm like rain off a roof. I stayed silent and watched. I let their anger burn itself out, turn to ashes. And when the flood of threats dried up, when they went quiet, breathing hard, exhausted by their own rage, their strategy changed. They saw they couldn't win by yelling and force. So they decided to try different tactics, to pull on strings they thought still connected to my heart. Nicole was first to sink into a chair and cover her face. Her shoulders shook with silent crying. It was acting, I knew, but it was good acting. Mr. Marcus, Dad, she sobbed. How can this be? We're family. We love you. We wanted the best for you. We thought about your future, your comfort. Yes, maybe we made mistakes. Got too pushy. But is it worth destroying everything over this? Daniel walked over and got down on his knees in front of me. He tried to touch my arm, but I pulled back slightly and he dropped his hand. He looked up at me. There was no more rage in his eyes. Now fake sadness and hurt filled them. Dad, he said quietly, emotionally, remember everything we had. Remember how you raised me. You gave me everything. You gave up your dreams, your plans for me so I could become who I am. Can you really destroy all of that now? Were all those sacrifices just so you could kick me out of my own home in the end? He talked about my sacrifices. He who never appreciated them in his entire life. He who took them for granted. Now he pulled them out like an old dusty flag, trying to hide behind it. I'm your son, Dad. His voice shook, and this time it almost sounded real. Fear makes people good actors. Your only child, your legacy. Everything I do for the future of our family, our name. So the Thompson name means even more. That's your honor too. Mom's honor. Great-grandpa's honor. He spoke, and I looked at him. And for the first time in all this time, I felt something besides cold anger and determination. It was pity. Deep, sharp, almost unbearable pity. Not for my son, but for this man kneeling at my feet. For a man whose life turned out to be a house built on sand, on someone else's last name. He held on to this name so desperately, to this story, because he had nothing else. Without the Thompson name he was nobody. He waited for an answer. He waited for tears, anger, maybe even forgiveness. He waited for the fatherly heart to break. But it was silent. It had turned to stone that day in the shed. I sighed slowly, and when I spoke, my voice sounded in the silence of the room so calm and clear that they both jumped. The farm is the smallest of your problems, Daniel. He looked at me without understanding. You've lived your whole life, I continued, looking him straight in the eyes, never looking away, claiming a heritage that was never yours. The respect you demanded, the name you built your life on, your business, your pride. All of it is smoke and mirrors. I stopped talking. I didn't explain anything. I didn't name Cole. I didn't tell the story of his real great-grandfather. I just left that sentence hanging in the air between us. Smoke and mirrors. I saw his brain working, how he frantically tried to figure out what I meant. I saw fear beginning to take shape in his eyes. The shape of something unknown but terrible. What are you saying? He whispered. What heritage? What name? I'm a Bennett. My wife is Sarah Thompson. My great-grandfather is Thomas Thompson. Your great-grandfather Thomas Thompson was a great man, I said quietly. And very kind. He gave your mother his name to save her. And you turned that name into a tool, a shield for your selfishness. You brought shame to it. Your mother was right. I let him figure out the rest on his own. I knew my son's imagination. I knew his biggest fears. The fear of being nobody, the fear of being exposed as a fake. I saw those fears coming alive in his eyes now, fed by my silence. He could imagine anything. that his mother was illegitimate, that there was some dark secret in the family line, any dirt that could stain the shining Thompson family name. And any of those guesses was torture for him. I gave him this food for thought, this poison that would slowly eat him from the inside. The horror of not knowing was my strongest weapon. Nicole looked from me to her husband, understanding nothing. She only saw that her strong, confident Daniel was on his knees on the floor, crushed by a few of my words. I stood up. I felt very tired but also surprisingly light. "You were given 3 days to pack your things and leave," I said, walking toward my bedroom door. "I would suggest you don't waste this time arguing." I went into the room and closed the door behind me. I didn't hear what they said after that. I just walked to the bed where Sarah was sleeping and sat down beside her. I took her hand. Felt warm and alive. I looked at her peaceful face and thought about what a heavy burden she had carried her whole life, and what a terrible price our son was paying because that burden was never lifted in time. 3 days passed in thick, tense silence. They didn't leave. I saw them whispering for hours, locked in their bedroom. Their phones rang constantly. I knew they wouldn't give up easily. They were preparing their last desperate move, and I was ready for it. On the evening of the 3rd day, Daniel entered my room. He was dressed in an expensive suit. His face was pale but determined. A kind of feverish, unnatural confidence had appeared in him. "Tomorrow at 10 a.m. at the community center," he said in a clipped voice. "Family meeting. Everyone will be there. Aunt Linda, Uncle Robert, my main business partners. You need to be there and bring your lawyer too. Let's see who wins this." He turned and left without waiting for an answer. It was a challenge, their final play. They decided to move the battle to their territory, surround themselves with supporters, and crush me with public opinion and family pressure. They were going to put on a show trial where I would be the accused. A confused old man who had fallen under the spell of a predatory lawyer. They wanted to declare me mentally unfit and take control of both me and the farm. It was a smart move, but they underestimated me again. The next day, exactly at 10 a.m., Raymond Foster and I walked into the community center meeting room. It was a big, plain space with folding chairs, and it was packed with people. Our relatives were there, people I hadn't seen for years. Sarah's cousin Linda, a bank manager. Her husband Robert, who owned a construction company. There were also strangers with hard business faces. Obviously those partners whose opinions Daniel valued so much. Daniel and Nicole stood in the center like they owned the place. Nicole was pouring coffee into cups, playing the gracious hostess. Daniel stood with that fake seriousness that was supposed to make people trust him. When we entered, all talking stopped. Every eye turned to me. I felt their curiosity, their judgment, their pity. To them, I was the cause of an embarrassing family problem. Raymond and I sat in the offered chairs slightly to the side. I was silent. My heart beat steadily. Felt no fear. I felt like I was back in my old office at Town Hall, about to present important documents that would change everything. Daniel began speaking. His voice was full of sadness and nobility. He talked about how much he loves and respects his father, how hard it is for him to see my condition. He hinted at confused thinking, at elderly stubbornness, at how easily old people are manipulated. He never said Raymond's name once. He only talked about this man, an unethical lawyer who wormed his way into the confidence of a sick person for money. He told them how he and Nicole took care of Mom and Dad, how they wanted to make sure we had a safe, comfortable retirement in the best facility. His speech was perfect. Every word hit its target. He painted a picture where he was a loving, suffering son, and I was a confused, ungrateful father. He talked for a long time. Relatives nodded sympathetically. Business partners watched with understanding. I saw the balance tipping in his favor. He had almost won. When he finished, a heavy silence filled the room. Daniel looked at me with poorly hidden victory in his eyes. "That's basically it," he said, spreading his hands wide. "We only want to protect Dad from himself and from bad influence. We're talking about legal guardianship. Otherwise, he'll make foolish choices and lose everything. Then Raymond stood up. He didn't argue or defend. He calmly walked to the table in the center of the room. Everything Mr. Bennet just said sounds very touching. He began in a flat voice. But let's move from emotions to facts. Facts don't lie. Mr. Bennet claims he's acting in his father's best interests, worried he'll lose the farm. But here is document. He took a copy of the forged deed from his briefcase and placed it on the table. The document which Mr. Bennet and his wife presented as proof of their rights to the farm. A document according to which Mr. Marcus Bennet has already lost his home. He paused. And here, he placed another paper beside it, is the analysis from a handwriting expert confirming the signature is forged, and a certificate from the county clerk's office stating that the notary who supposedly certified this paper had retired and moved to Florida 3 years before this document was supposedly signed. A murmur ran through the room. Aunt Linda frowned and leaned forward. Uncle Robert took off his reading glasses. Daniel's business partners exchanged worried glances. The picture of the loving son began to crack and crumble. "These are lies," Daniel shouted, but there was no confidence in his voice anymore. "These are facts," Raymond cut him off sharply. "And now, with your permission, my client will speak. He doesn't need guardianship. He needs to be heard." All eyes turned to me again. I slowly stood up. I didn't look at Daniel. I looked at the faces of the people in this room. "Good morning," I said. My voice didn't shake. It was the voice of a town clerk used to presenting facts. My son talked about the heritage of the Thompson family, about honor. I have dedicated my entire life to serving this family and protecting its history. So please allow me to clarify some things. I took another folder from my bag. Heritage isn't just a farm and money. It's primarily memory and truth. Here, I placed Great-Grandpa Thomas's letter on the table. This is a letter from my father-in-law, Thomas Thompson, to his adopted granddaughter, my wife Sarah. He writes about love, about duty, about kindness. He writes about how he saved an orphan girl by giving her his name. This is the true heritage of the Thompson family. Love and sacrifice. I spoke calmly, laying out my family's history before them like cards on a table. I told them the truth, not all of it. I didn't name William Cole. I didn't talk about the false accusations. The honor of the family, even this family, I didn't want to destroy publicly. I simply said that Sarah was an adopted grandchild, the daughter of a wrongly accused teacher whom Thomas Thompson saved from a broken system by giving her his last name and his love. Thomas left this farm to me. I pointed to the copy of the will, because he believed I would preserve its spirit. The spirit of a family built not on blood but on love. And my son, I looked at Daniel for the first time, decided his right to. This farm was based on a forged piece of paper. I stopped talking, and in that silence everything became crystal clear. I didn't accuse. I simply placed 2 documents side by side. On one side, a letter breathing love and kindness, the real history of the family. On the other side, a fake deed breathing greed and lies. I contrasted genuine heritage with false entitlement. It was over. I saw it on their faces. Uncle Robert slowly stood up, walked to the table, picked up Great-Grandpa Thomas's letter, and read it. Then he looked at Daniel with such disgust that Daniel seemed to shrink. The business partners silently stood up from their seats and, without saying goodbye, headed for the exit. They wanted nothing to do with a man who not only turned out to be a fraud but wasn't even a real Thompson. His main asset, his family name, turned to dust before their eyes. Nicole stood clutching her husband's arm tightly. Her face was gray with horror. She watched the guests leaving, watched the ruins of their world crumbling. And I think at that moment she hated him for destroying everything. Daniel stood in the middle of the room, completely alone. He was broken, destroyed. And not by a court, not by the police. He was destroyed by the truth, which I carefully, like a town clerk, had brought into the light. His final desperate move turned into a public execution he had arranged for himself. He was exposed as a cruel, greedy fraud before everyone whose opinion mattered more to him than life itself. He was completely and finally broken. I turned around and, looking at no one else, walked out of the room. Raymond followed me. We silently walked outside into the parking lot where the cool spring air waited for us. It had never felt so fresh and clean. We didn't say a word to each other. Everything had already been said. 6 months have passed. Fall has arrived, painting the mountains in gold and orange. The farm has become very quiet. This silence no longer bothers me. It was healing like cool water on a burn. It was filled with light coming through the clean windows, the smell of hay and the quiet neighing of horses in the barn. Sarah passed away at the end of summer, quietly in her sleep in her own bed. Her tired heart simply stopped beating. I held her hand until the very end. We didn't talk about Daniel. We didn't talk about the past. We talked about our youth, about our first date at the county rodeo, about how funny she looked trying to ride a horse for the first time. We said goodbye. And when she left, I cried for her. Not for the wife who carried someone else's name, but for my Sarah, the only woman I ever loved. I buried her next to her adopted grandfather, Thomas Thompson. 2 noble souls whose stories turned out to be so closely connected now lay side by side under the Colorado sky. Daniel was not at the funeral. He and Nicole disappeared. They moved out of their apartment in town, selling it to pay off debts I never knew existed. Their world, built on the reputation of the Thompson name, collapsed in a single day. Partners turned their backs. Friends stopped returning calls. The society they so desperately wanted to impress rejected them completely. I heard from distant cousins that they moved to some small town in Nebraska where Nicole found work as a waitress in a diner. Nothing was heard about Daniel. He didn't call or write. For me, he simply stopped existing like the ghost I once talked about. I felt no satisfaction, no hatred, only emptiness in the place where fatherly love used to be. Today I went down to the old root cellar under the farmhouse. But it was no longer the dark, damp tomb where my rebirth once began. Hired workers. They cleaned it out, painted the walls white, installed bright electric lights. Along the walls now stood not dusty shelves with old canning jars, but new wooden ones smelling of fresh pine. In the center, a large sturdy desk. My desk. This cellar, once my prison, became my sanctuary. My personal archive, the place where I finally returned to myself. I slowly laid out old photographs, letters, and documents on the desk. All my life I had been the keeper of other people's stories. The history of the Thompson family, the history of my wife, the history of my son. I carefully collected them, organized them, protected them. Now the time had come to collect my own story. I took a new photo album with blank pages in a hard leather cover. On the first page, I carefully placed Thomas Thompson's letter. The document about love and kindness that became the cornerstone of this whole story. Next to it I placed a photograph. Not my wedding photo, not a picture with my son, but a different one. Small black and white photo taken many years ago. In it, a young man with glasses and short hair sits at a desk covered with papers, looking at the camera with hope in his eyes. That was me. Marcus, a 22-year-old college student studying public administration, in love with his future career, full of dreams and plans. The me I had buried under the weight of family duties and sacrifices. I looked at this young man and smiled. I had been walking back to him for so long. Through 38 years of serving others, through betrayal and pain, through the cold of the shed, I finally found him again. I was no longer just a keeper of stories. Became an author. The author of my own story, in which I decided what was important and what needed to be left in the past. I didn't erase anything from it. Not the joy of being a father, not the bitterness of disappointment. But now I placed the emphasis myself. I gave events the meaning I believed was true. I finished organizing my work and walked to the small window of the cellar that the workers had installed at my request. It looked straight out into the fields. From down here the world looked different. I saw not the tops of the wheat stalks but their roots going deep into the earth. I saw dried grass that would become soil for new growth in the spring. I placed a cup of hot coffee on the windowsill. The smell of coffee mixed with the scent of earth and dying plants. Steam from the cup rose to the glass, and the world outside the window became slightly blurry, like an old painting. Took a sip. It was quiet in the house, quiet in my soul. For the first time in many, many years, I didn't feel like someone's husband, someone's father, someone's son-in-law. I was simply Marcus. A man looking out the window of his own farm at his own land. A man no longer defined by his past sacrifices but defined by the calm, conscious future he was building for himself. I was free. Absolutely, completely, until my very last breath. Free. That is where my story ends. Thank you for spending this time with me at Jamal's Stories. If it touched your heart, please like and subscribe to the channel. Your feedback means the world to me. I wish you peace in your heart and warmth in your home. Until we meet again. Such a complicated but very powerful story, dear friends. A story about sacrifice, betrayal, and the terrible price we sometimes must pay for our own freedom and dignity. It makes you think deeply, doesn't it? The main question hanging in the air is about boundaries. Where is that line where a father's forgiveness ends and the fight for your own life begins? Did Marcus do the right thing by destroying his own son's world, even after his son's terrible cruelty? Was it an act of fair justice or cold, calculated revenge? Each of you, I'm sure, has formed your own answer. Perhaps some will judge Marcus for his harshness. Others will admire his strength and determination. Perhaps you still have questions about what happened to the characters, or some detail of the story sparked your curiosity. Share your thoughts in the comments below this video. I'm always incredibly interested to read your opinions and see how differently the same story touches people's hearts. Your thoughts are very important to us. If this story moved you, please don't forget to like and subscribe to Jamal's Stories. Every like, every new subscriber is huge support for us and motivation to continue finding and sharing new, equally powerful stories for you. It's important for us to know that our work reaches your hearts. Did you enjoy the story? And which city are you watching from? Connect in the comments. If you loved the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your wonderful support. I'm looking forward to reading your comments about the story. On the screen you can see 2 new life stories that I strongly recommend. There's so much more content on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story. With love and respect.